My name is Faranpojo mni. Today, I want to welcome you specially to this podcast tagged Impact, Talk and Do. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome today to the program Impact, Talk and Do. In other words, it's not just a place where we talk, it's a place where we also make efforts to do. But the truth is that any society that's going to advance itself must have conversations with itself. Discussions, ideas being stirred up, to help us point to the North Star of what direction we must go towards. Today, in the global space, one must begin to see that there is opportunity for impact in little and big ways. From the little idea of having computers in our homes, to having phones in our hands, to now having open AI being a conversation. In fact, can we dare to add to it to discussing the idea of occupying Mars being a conversation today? We must be very intentional to bring up conversations that help us move in the direction of the future. The future is not one that must meet a person unaware. The future must meet us prepared. In fact, the best way to prepare for the future is to create it. And that's what we hope to have on this platform, discussing things from our local community to the global space, all in the bid of making society better. Well, in today's space, my intention is to have conversations around leadership. The concept of leadership is such that must not be stifled any longer with previous ideas or ideologies. We must take the conversation of leadership to the open space today so that it can meet with contributions of what can make us serve our country better. In today's conversation, I'm going to be looking at very important steps that we must not fail to make. It's interesting that in a country like Nigeria, for example, where I am at this time, we have the very interesting outlook of the upcoming elections, where there seems to be so much uncertainty from the national parties to their national primaries, and a lot of hustle and bustles, new surprises, interesting dynamics seems to be setting into the space of the political space, and we should start to have discussions around them, not necessarily because we want to control the tides of how the elections will turn out necessarily, which we hope will turn out very well, but it's also important to start to have conversations about what this whole effort should aim towards getting, what we should not lose to address. For example, we stand a great chance of wanting to discuss things that bind us together and address in the commonality of the insecurity in our space today. We have that as an option. We have the option of discussing things that have to do with, security as a nation. We have the opportunity of having to discuss things that surround, the social justice that seems to be ongoing, initiatives that must be deployed at this time to set some kind of justice in place. Like we know, it is rather very difficult to accomplish peace and progress where there is no justice. And so these are some of the conversations that as leaders, as community leaders, as governmental leaders, as religious leaders, we need to start to have these conversations with ourselves, asking questions that truly translate to a better society, asking questions that truly impact on the reality, asking questions that the initiatives of those seeking to run for power would not just be ideas that is distant from the reality of the people. And one of the first things I want to speak about in terms of the concept of unity or unification as a concept in this discussion is that there must be identification between leadership and following. In other words, there seems to be a very sharp dichotomy between the leaders and the followers, or the citizen, if you will call it so, such that the citizen seems to have a very wide gap. In fact, it almost looks like the leaders are excited to distance themselves more and more from the citizens, so that when a leader happens to find himself in the place of power or politics or governance or whatever thing we want to call it, he seems to be grateful for it as a job to protect himself, and then he forbids himself from returning back to the society that birthed him. We have that in various situations from the Lagos state, some of the local government areas in Lagos state, and even in the national space at the national government levels. And you'll see how that there's a very wide gap between leadership and the citizenry. This gap must be closed. We need to reduce this distance that we make for ourselves. The more we do very damaging things to ourselves by not identifying with the citizens or with the stakeholders, as it were, because it's not just the citizens in that context that we address here, but when we do not identify with the electorate, as it were, we'll soon find out that our efforts, contribution, and returns to the electorate will be useless. In fact, it will be futile, simply because there's no connection between the leadership and the people. There must be that connection between the leadership and the people. When we're thinking about economic development, we must be addressing the subjects that matter to the people. It's not just enough to say we want to give out money. Money for what? Is it effective to do business out there? The money that a person receives as a loan, is it effective? When you give NEL funds, education funds and loans and all of that, you've done well, but really and truly, are there jobs for the populace to engage after they graduate? These are concerns that we should look into. And in today's broadcast, or will I call it the podcast today, I intend to make some very simple suggestions. I'm of the opinion that the problems are known to everyone, from the education sector to the electorate sector to the almost every sector has an issue that could use some help. What I realize is that we need to have these honest conversations to situate ourselves in reality. It looks like a lot of things that people expect are wished, or will I say, people just sit down and expect governance should be that easy. Now, I've related a bit with governance enough to know that it's not as easy as we think sometimes. However, it should not also be as difficult as we present it. I don't think it should be as difficult. For a government that is serious about, leading her people into a better promise, your efforts, your real achievements should literally be your advertorials, should literally be your campaign. Keeping your promises should be. Now, my recommendation and suggestion in this conversation is, would it be okay for leadership at every sphere, starting from the federal leadership, to look at things circumspectly in a robust manner that truly answers the germane questions? I think sometimes some of the problems we face is because we think the questions are things people cannot contribute to. And I really think that is not true. I think when we call people to a room and we truly present the facts on the table could be picked by people, because one critical factor that defines effective leadership is problem solving. If our leadership is not willing to gather the facts together, it will be very hard to solve the real problems. So in this broadcast, I am calling on leadership. at the federal government, at the state level government, and even at the local governments, even in community spaces, churches, mosques, and every other space we can have, religious backgrounds, NGOs, whatever thing, cultural backgrounds, our traditional rulers should be willing to have very honest conversations. Conversations that answer questions like, is religion our problem? You know, it's easy to deface that conversation and say, no, we don't talk about it as a religious problem. We don't like the sound of it. But is it truly a concern? Okay, fine. Is tribe a problem? Is the region I come from a problem? These conversations should not be things that we just answer on behalf of the people. The people, the stakeholders, the electorate, the citizens, the entrepreneurs know what they feel. They know what they say. So I take a case in point. For example, South Africa. It's easy to hear from the government, no, there's no xenophobia here. Xenophobia is not real. But the people of the land have given 30th of June for the foreigners to leave their country. In fact, in videos trending, one of them will illustrate a chief or something, whatever it is, stating, don't listen to the government. I mean, and that's true. You can stay in your office and say what you want to say. But at some point, our rubber must touch the road. We must be able to give value and life to the people's experiences and not just stay in our air-conditioned offices or bulletproof cars to represent citizens that we are not connected to. So that's further amplifies my first point. There must be some point of identification. If our society is going to see better days, we must call ourselves to identify with the real problem by hearing from those that are concerned, those that feel where it pinches the most, to know exactly what the issues are. And I said, we must be willing to have those hard conversations. Conversations, like I said earlier, is it religious? Let's face it. Is it racial? Is it tribalistic? Is it ethnic? Let's not assume just because we don't like the sound to sweep it over the carpet that it's not religious. It's not religious. Does it have any trace? Does it have any substance to truth that tribe is the problem here? Does it have any substance to truth that actually what's going on is a get back of a particular government against a previous tribe that had, unsettled governance in the country? Because these are conversations, if we call them national conference, it sounds too formal. I think we should have very real sessions where we hear, and we may not be able to solve all and I think that thing is also a problem. That philosophy that says we really can't solve all the problems in the world, so we just need to live with some and just accept that some people will be victims and casualties of the effort of governance. I'm saying to us today that it becomes reproachable when governance avoids its very peculiar duty of having tough conversations to solve tough problems. Yeah. And when you see a problem that you've gone around it several times and you're trying to solve it, that problem can be bigger. We're not the first to have these problems. But for the much that it cannot be solved, it's usually hidden under emotional things. For example, when ego mounts itself on individuals, it's easy to tell that ego is a vaporized gaseous energy that people would hardly admit to. However, it stands true that it can get in the way of problem solving. That's the way sensitive issues like this that can call for emotional build-up are things that we do not want to bring to the table, but I dare say we should. I dare suggest that we should at least take it out of the table effectively by trashing that it's not an issue. I'm not looking for how to suggest that it is one, but I'm saying whatever the matter is, let's deal with it. Let leadership take the bull by the horn and stop playing card games with the lives and destiny of people. You see, it's rhetoric, but it's true that the problems we do not solve today will become the gorillas that will beat us tomorrow. Someone said that the snake you do not kill in Genesis will become the dragon that will attack you in Revelation. I know the days when it used to sound like a sound bite that the people who do not train, the hoodlums who do not pay attention to, will become threats at our windows if we do not pay attention to them. And that's why I'm saying governance should not run away from its challenge. The challenge of problem solving, the challenge of identifying with the people that are in the problem, and hopefully proffering pure, honest, true to earth, down to earth solutions to some of these problems. That's number one. Number two that I will take for today because of time is to talk about the social justice. And I'm going to factor this also into our judiciary. I think the judiciary system needs to build more trust in the hearts of the people. It's important that people can look to justice, or the social justice, or the justice system of our country, to trust that there will be equity in the room, that Lady Justice does not look to who she's holding, whose baby she's holding, but ready to meet justice and fair treatment to all. It's important that that sense of equity in judgment and justice should come. I would like to use this time to commend EFCC for a very great work done on the former Minister of Power, who was allegedly accused of jumping bail and running from judgment, and has been declared, just judgments, or justice, I should say, that the verdict has been passed on him about spending some 75 years in jail or something. But my point essentially is that we should give credibility once again to the possibility of peace and fair hearing, to the possibility of knowing that justice and judgment will not be tampered with by the state power, or the power of the state, and that people will get fair, treatments as the case might be. Where there will be need for pardons, grants, welcome. I'm not looking for the strict rule of law, because sometimes I've learned that it's important to be flexible where it's necessary. And I think that should also be considered, but it must be done in a way that truly meets with fairness and equity. I really think that the government has a lot on our hands. Like I said earlier on, the duty of governance is not an easy task, but we also know it should not be as difficult as it has been for today's governance. It's interesting that the things that sometimes we say, when we get to the place of governance, they may prove as difficult as we feel. It gives me the concern, therefore, a closure, that sometimes we are not considering things holistically. Recently, I saw how the military was looking for the person who makes, what will I call it? Local powers, traditional powers, spiritual powers for some of the terrorists and bandits that we have. And that introduced a new light to the whole concept of the battle against terrorism, to suggest to us somehow remotely that the bandits also introduce spiritual power. Now, if you're fighting with guns and bullets, you look like you're trying, but you cannot solve spiritual battles with physical bullets. So, if on one hand, the people causing the mayhem and the destructions and all of that know enough to introduce spirituality into their warfare, that they say the more you look, the less you see, the more of them you arrest, the less of them you can keep. Before we start to feel like it is overdressed to go spiritual, I think that is something worth also introducing. So maybe bullets don't kill people as we thought all the time, because it looks like there's a space for spirituality in the strategy of those that are causing and dislodging peace in our communities and society and country at large. Would it be too much for our government to also factor the need for spirituality of some sort? I know the power of state is very powerful and can almost always dwarf the powers of any kind of fetish work, but I tell you that it's necessary to know that spirituality must not be overlooked in the space of a continued battle like this. So you are using pellets, bullets, gun shields, gunpowder, gun whatever, to fight spiritual battles where they get reinforced with blood, and you are using bullets and RPGs and all of that, but they are literally disappearing to appear and disappear when they finish that. Also, how do you deal with such a battle? I strongly suggest that our government should also be willing to rise to the call and be equally as dynamic as occasion beats to get the desired results out. Well, in summary today, I think I've been able to invite governance to having very strong conversations, to put conversations on the table, and have them. What is the reality of our society? I've always believed 4 years was not enough for a good governance, but in 4 years we should see that a lot is going on and that we're moving in the right direction. It will engineer and encourage people to vote. In fact, people to encourage more votes. For example, I particularly like what's going on at the international airports in Lagos and Abuja, for starters. And it will look like whatever is making that happen should continue. At the same time, the only reason we can hope it continues is because in 4 years thereabout, we can see the movement, the trajectory it's going towards. My honest hope and prayer is that leadership will find the opportunity and the courage, the wherewithal to invite relevant stakeholders to the table who are not only talkers but also doers, people who can truly render the impact and make our society truly a better one. I pray for our president that the Lord God will help him. I pray for our leaders, as it is required at this time, for the courage to confront non-entities who seek to undermine this country in whatever capacity they have been doing. It is my prayer that this broadcast will inspire something either now or in the future for sound judgments from the part of our leadership. May God help us, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you.